Like, what do you guys think, like, really went wrong with the device? And do you picture a world where this can work if it was improved somehow? Or do you think this whole category is just kind of smoke and mirrors and there's no real value in it?
Absolute smoke and mirrors, no real value to it.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. As always, I am the world's greatest podcast host. My name is Andy, and I'll pass it off to the guys for a brief intro for audience members who are new.
Hey, hello, what's going on, everyone? So please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, as well as our Clips channel and all of our personal channels too. And yeah.
Hey guys, Tristan here. We've got a pretty loaded docket across the board for you today, so I'll let Andy take us away on that front.
Yeah, for sure. Not only do we have a loaded docket this week, we're going to be talking about some controversial topics, let's just say, this week. So hopefully we don't get canceled, but I'll try my best to, be fair and as unbiased as I can. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's jump in. So the first one, some economic news for the day. Today was the FOMC meeting for May. So we're actually recording this one day early. Usually we do Thursdays, but today is Wednesday. We're doing this on FOMC day. So basically, it's just when the Fed, if you guys don't know what FOMC is when the Federal Reserve of the United States announces their rate decision, whether they're going to hike, pause, or cut rates. And it was widely expected that the Federal Reserve was going to do nothing today. And just by doing nothing, I mean hold the rate steady. And that's exactly what they did. But perhaps what's more interesting is everyone was kind of excited to hear what JPowell had to say about the economy and his kind of perspective going forward, because, people were concerned that there was going to be the Fed was going to go ultra hawkish meaning aggressive, right? And implying that maybe there's going to be another rate hike down the line if, conditions, if the economic conditions, if the inflation doesn't turn down like they were expecting, and if the economic conditions remain, relatively strong in terms of employment numbers, which is so far what we have seen. However, what ended up happening was that JPowell is actually very dovish. If you ask any observers or anyone who watched the speech, basically they asked JPowell about stagflation, right? So stagflation is when your economy is stagnating, but inflation remains high. So that's obviously a big concern, and that's a very difficult situation if it were to happen for the Fed to deal with, because they don't want to jack up interest rates more because your economy is stagnating. But if you lower interest rates, then that means that inflation is going to get worse. So, that would be really bad, right? That would mean that the Fed is backed into a corner where they can't cut and they can't raise either. And then, you're just kind of stuck in this scenario where you get the worst of both worlds. You get unemployment going up and inflation going up, right? So they asked JPowell what he thought about the possibility of a stagflationary period, and he basically said verbatim, he said, "I don't see the stag or the inflation." So basically, he doesn't see that as a very likely possibility, and basically that kind of reassured the markets. And if you look at the markets, it just kind of it was starting the day off very in the red, and then it just kind of skyrocketed after he made those comments. And also, maybe what's interesting as well is he said that the Federal Reserve announced that it will be slowing down its pace of balance sheet reduction. So in case you guys don't know what that means, just to briefly explain, so there's two kind of levers other than interest rates that the Federal Reserve can pull, right? Or is one lever, but they can pull it in either direction, and that's QE versus QT. which stands for quantitative easing or quantitative tightening. So quantitative easing, as the name implies, it loosens financial conditions, meaning that they basically they buy bonds, right? So when they buy bonds, they inject money into the market. So they take in a bunch of bonds and then they give out a bunch of cash, right? So that gives liquidity to the market and eases financial conditions, which is what they've been doing for a long time. During like COVID and stuff, when they lowered interest rates basically to zero, they also did QE. But then now they're trying to tighten the financial conditions because inflation's gotten out of control. They're doing the opposite of that, which is QT, which stands for quantitative tightening. So tightening basically means that they're selling the bonds that they have and extracting cash out of the market. So they're giving the market bonds and they're taking the cash out of the market. So that causes liquidity to decrease. But what's happening is that the Fed is slowing down their pace of QT. So they were doing QT before and they're still doing it now, but they're going to slow down the pace of it. And the way that you can track this is what's called the Fed balance sheet. So if you guys look on the docket, that chart from Fed, like the official government organization that tracks these things, basically you can see the Fed balance sheet, right? That's the line. And whenever it increases, that means that they're buying bonds. So that means that they're doing QE, right? So when that chart goes up, like when they're buying bonds, the bonds have to go somewhere, right? So it goes on a balance sheet, kind of like a company, right? When you buy bonds, you put it somewhere and then it goes into your list of assets. When you sell the bonds, the chart kind of goes down, right? So the higher the balance sheet, the more liquidity and the more supportive the Fed is, right? And the concern is that, the Fed is like buying all the bonds and the balance sheet is going too high. So now they're trying to roll it off, but now they're slowing down the pace of rolling it off. And if you look at the macro trend, the balance sheet has gone nowhere but up, meaning that the Fed, as much as they're trying to talk tough and they're trying to say we're being aggressive on extracting liquidity from the market, they're still overall over the long term injecting more and more liquidity into the market. So that's kind of what that chart is trying to imply. So I can talk all day about the Fed and economics and government policy, but I have a feeling that that's kind of boring. So why don't I try to approach it from a different topic? So we're all Bitcoin bulls here on this show, right? And why don't we try to approach it from maybe like a Bitcoiner's perspective, right? So as we all know, Bitcoin took kind of a dip recently, right? So it went from 65K-ish all the way down to, I think, like 56, 57K. And then now it's rebounded slightly. Now it's just over 58K as I'm recording this. But a lot of people are kind of scared because if this is your first rodeo in the Bitcoin game, seeing a 20% decline or 20% plus decline in the price of Bitcoin in such a short amount of time is kind of daunting, right? I know that because at one point I was new to the Bitcoin game as well, right? So a lot of people are scared, especially people who are in Bitcoin proxies, which are even more volatile than Bitcoin itself. So for example, Bitcoin miners like Bitfarms, right? So I just kind of maybe wanted to get you guys' opinion on Bitcoin and how this FOMC meeting maybe affects Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners. But before I do that, let me just give a quick, maybe a 30-second reassurance to everyone who's in maybe Bitfarms stock specifically, how I think that better days are ahead, right? So today was also the day that Bitfarms put out their April update, and I really do appreciate that they put out the update on May 1st, which is today, right? Because they totally didn't have to put it out this fast, but the fact that they put it out May 1st, showing that they're not trying to hide anything, and it's good, sending good vibes, right? Basically. And if you look at the April report from Bitfarms, it's pretty much all good news as far as I can see. So what happened was Bitfarms They mined 269 Bitcoin in April, which is compared to 286 Bitcoin in March. But keep in mind that in April we had the halving, right? So it occurred around 420, right? So April 20th. So after that, there was 10 days where the reward was cut in half. So logically, it would be lower than what they did in March, and also the hashing difficulty went up as well. But if you can see, like 269 versus 286, it's not that different, right? It's only a little bit less. And they also increased their Bitcoin HODL position a little bit, not by a lot, but 830 Bitcoin now, as opposed to 806 in March. But what's perhaps even more interesting is that they doubled their synthetic HODL position. So if you guys remember what that was, that's buying long-dated call options on Bitcoin rather than buying Bitcoin itself. And the reason why you might want to do that, and my guess as to the reason why Bitfarms is doing this, is you can get more kind of leverage, right? Like a dollar goes further in terms of capturing Bitcoin's upside if you buy call options versus the underlying Bitcoin itself, right? And same thing with stocks, right? Like same reason why people would want to buy call options on stocks rather than buying the stock themselves, because the dollar gives you more upside. So they doubled their synthetic HODL position, and then they also improved their efficiency 9%, which is pretty huge, right? And also, excuse me, also they're bringing their Paraguay site online soon. So I think they said, fully operational by the end of May. So basically pretty much all good news. And they're also receiving a $23 million tax refund, which was unexpected, right? So basically, that's the news around Bitfarms. I've talked a lot. I've talked about the Fed. I've talked about Bitcoin. I've talked about Bitfarms. I just wanted to get your opinions, you guys' opinions on any of this. So number one, what do you think of the Fed news? Do you think that Jay Powell was right to be dovish, or maybe he should have been more careful and more hawkish? Number two, what do you think this means for Bitcoin going forward? And number three, what do you think of the Bitfarms news? So 3 questions, or if you want to add more, if you want to answer questions that I didn't ask, and if you want to add more info or your opinions, feel free to do so as well. So let me kick it to you guys.
Okay, before we begin, can we just confirm the definitions between hawkish and dovish, just for the audience, and low-key me too? I feel like I know. I just want to, just in case.
So hawkish means like, think of a hawk, right? Like it's a very aggressive animal. So hawkish means that it's favoring like raising interest rates or tightening financial conditions even more. So hawkish would be like, hey, like we might hike rates because inflation's still out of control, and we're going to be on the side of crushing inflation by making business harder to do and slowing down business more, right? So that's hawkish. Dovish, so think of a dove, right? It's a very passive animal, and it's just kind of like, we want to be accommodative. We want to be nice to the markets. We want to lower rates maybe. And we want to be, just want to be more accommodative to the market and to doing business. And, if inflation runs a little hot, we'll just let it run a little bit hot for a little bit longer, but we still think it's coming down. So that's just kind of the difference, right? So think of like the aggressiveness of a hawk versus kind of the passiveness of a dove. So, and you apply that to interest rates and economic policy.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think for the main part, for the interest rate pausing and potential like adding of the interest rates, I think he's just trying to be careful. That's the main thing. At the grand scheme of things, he probably doesn't want to repeat the events of the 70s and the 80s where they did a little bit of a slip up and then that caused a little bit of a bad economic effect. So he's trying to be extremely careful. Deep down, I'm sure he wants to perhaps maybe like drop those interest rates because a lot of people are drowning. He knows that for sure. Like, I don't think he wouldn't know about that, but maybe like just based on historical data, like there's just too much bad instead of good, so it's just not quite where he wants it to be, and therefore like he's unable to be more dovish. There's like still little small signs of hawkishness. Yeah, putting it into here, and then so yeah, I think time will tell, and then we'll see what happens in the near future. But fingers crossed for all of us, because obviously we want more of a dovish approach. But we got to see how the economy is and operating and working. And as for how it's going to affect Bitcoin, I think the fundamental principle is if interest rates are still up, it's going to be harder to borrow money. And I guess for like retail investors, it'll be harder to purchase money if they have like less access to it. And there's like electricity bills and etc. that all these miners have to deal with. So if they have less money to have access to all that to pay for those bills, it might be harder for more Bitcoin to circulate. So I think maybe the demand might lower unless the interest rates lower. So I think in that case that might happen, and it's kind of unfortunate for us, but hopefully in the near future, in a perfect world, rates drop, more money circulation, people want to buy Bitcoin more, more demand in Bitcoin happens, and then we're all happy campers. So, and then last but not least, in terms of Bitfarms, it's, I can't remember the last question, but I'll try to answer it, and hopefully it kind of matches. It seems like they're going in a direction of up rather than down. They're making these like small changes. Like it seems pretty positive in my opinion. I think the one thing that stood out to me was the tax refund, which is a sweet deal if you ask me. And then new locations in Quebec and Paraguay are pretty neat. I'm sure like the cost of operation in Paraguay would be a lot cheaper. So I think that's definitely a plus. And yeah, those are my thoughts and opinions. So I'm sure Tristan has a lot more to add for sure. But yeah, cool.
I'll jump in here next. Then yeah, with regards to the Fed, with JPowell being more dovish, I think that it's clear to me that Powell probably does want to lower rates, but also inflation is higher than he's generally been expecting. So it's difficult to lower the rates when inflation is higher, because the whole point of having higher rates is to lower inflation. So I think he's trying to kind of walk that middle ground where it's like he doesn't want to be too hawkish and he doesn't want to be too dovish. And he's kind of trying to walk that line between keeping confidence, but also not letting us, and I think not letting us like get too into one side or the other. And I think that kind of is why it seems to come off as more dovish, is because he's not trying to say that they're going to do something that they're not going to do, which is, you know, by definition, a more passive approach, which is a more dovish approach, right? But I don't think rate hikes are completely off the table. I think that it's unlikely, but I think if there was a really high inflation report, I think that we could see some reaction, even though the economy is pretty brutalized by the rates already. So I think it's unlikely. I think most likely we will get rate cuts in the not too distant future. But we'll have to see how that plays out either way. And I think that Jay Powell is trying to keep it in ambiguous as to where those rate cuts, where and when those rate cuts will be happening. I don't think he's trying to tip his hand to us yet. And with regards to Bitcoin, I think that at this point, Bitcoin would be a dovish Fed would be more beneficial to Bitcoin than not, because the majority of the inflation is gone, and inflation is, you know, will help Bitcoin because the dollar will inflate against Bitcoin, which means that, you know, you're getting less like the purchasing power of your dollar goes down, but the purchasing power of Bitcoin doesn't necessarily go down at the same time. So inflation can be a good thing, especially since people tend to use it as a hedge against inflation for Bitcoin itself. And so in that regard, having a high inflation is not necessarily the worst thing for Bitcoin itself and Bitcoin holders. It's not ideal for anyone who has to do anything with normal cash, which is everyone. So it's, again, not great in general. But from a purely Bitcoin itself perspective, Bitcoin itself benefits from higher inflation, at least in my opinion. And then in that regard, I would say the fact that they're moving towards a more dovish, as Dom was kind of saying, a more dovish approach makes money easier to obtain. And if money is easier to obtain and there's an asset that is outperforming other assets and you have access to cheaper loans, there will be money flowing into Bitcoin no matter what, even if it's from just purely the miners buying more machines or something to that effect, right? Like there's going to be a monetary flow into Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem. So I think Bitcoin will probably do quite well as a result of a more dovish approach. And I think that this is by and large probably going to help Bitcoin more than hinder it, again, just because again the monetary funds will be easier to access and there's a higher chance of people taking more of a risk in that sense, where a lot of people will view Bitcoin as more risky, and they may be more likely to risk it when interest rates are lower than when they're higher, right? So I think that by and large, this is going to be a pretty bullish catalyst. And I think that's also why you'll see the majority of the stock market tends to go up when there's a dovish, because Bitcoin, like every other stock on the market, is, if you have extra money and you want to invest it somewhere, the stock market is basically stock market, Bitcoin, crypto, whatever. That's basically some of your only areas you can invest that money and hope to get a higher return than the interest rate. So by lowering the interest rates, there's more people who are going to be trying to get that higher return and get that difference between the interest rate and the gains that they make, and kind of take that little gap between the two as profit. And so as that, in that regard, like the market will generally perform bullish, and Bitcoin just basically, enjoys the benefits of that as well. And then when we get into the Bitfarms, I think it's pretty clear to me that Bitfarms has got a pretty solid setup going into post-halving. I think having a pretty high, all things considered. I mean, obviously, we haven't seen mining reports from other companies, really, to my knowledge. At least I haven't seen them. But I would say that their report being relatively close to the pre-halving amount in terms of Bitcoin production, I think that's already a pretty good sign. And a lot of that will be due to higher transaction fees during the halving timeframe, which obviously won't continue into now as much because transaction fees have come down. But it's good to see that they were able to benefit from that during that time frame. And it's also, I think it's definitely a good sign that they're improving efficiency, because one of the big things for the Bitcoin miners is the efficiency at which they can mine, and having a 9% reduction improvement of efficiency means that they will be benefiting substantially from that, because they'll be reducing their cost per Bitcoin, which is definitely a nice benefit. And I also do like to see them increasing their synthetic HODL. I mean, it's a little bit weird in general, because like they are a mining company, not an investment company. So having the HODL, the synthetic HODL, is a little bit weird because that's more of like a finance thing. But I understand that they're trying to basically do the HODL strategy without having to hold as much cash as the HODL strategy usually requires. Because like functionally having, like, say for example, like Hut having 9,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet, like that is theoretically 9,000 or whatever that is in dollars. That is that amount of infrastructure, land, machines that they could be reinvesting into their business. So theoretically, there's an opportunity cost to holding it in Bitcoin. Whereas this synthetic HODL strategy reduces the capital requirement to have that position in Bitcoin, while hopefully maintaining a reasonable amount of the potential gains from that Bitcoin increase. So it's a little bit weird, but I'm not necessarily opposed to it. It's just it's not super standard. And they I'd say by and large their setup is pretty strong. Post halving, I'm feeling pretty confident in their especially in this report. Like, it looks like it's going in the right direction, which is nice to see from my perspective. And again, not financial advice, and I am invested in Bitfarms, so seeing gains in Bitfarms is good for me, and I'm talking about a stock that I own, so anytime there's going to be goods, I am biased. I'm going to be looking at it going like, this is good, right? So, don't just make investment decisions based on what some dude from the internet says.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, like, to be transparent, I am also a big shareholder in Bitfarms. Well, I say big, like, relatively, right? For me, like, I'm not on the board or something like that, but it's like, it's a significant part of my portfolio, let's just say. But yeah, anyways, so my opinion, I won't spend too long on this because I think I've like already maybe if you watch previous episodes, I've made kind of my opinions pretty clear, and I haven't really changed my opinion. So basically, around the FOMC meeting, my opinion is that the Fed really wants to cut, but it's just as Tristan said earlier, like, the data is not coming in at a good enough like rate where inflation is for them to really justify and make a case for cutting right now. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to cut. And I think that I still stand by my prediction that they're going to cut at least twice this year. Or my base case is that they cut twice, but at least once, but most likely twice is what I said last episode. And I stand by that. And the reasoning for that is I forgot to include a chart on the docket for this actually, but I was showing Tristan, through a group message earlier that about the interest payments that the U.S. has to make on their national debt, and it's just I will find the chart and include it in post, but it's just going exponential, right? So I think that if I remember correctly, if they don't lower rates by this time next year, which is April, or now it's May, but April of 2025, if they continue to hold the rate at 5.25%, then their yearly run rate of interest payments alone on the national debt. So this is just interest, not including any principal. The interest portion alone will be $1.7 trillion, which is almost twice the defense budget. So that is absolutely crushing. Right. And if you think about how much the US spends on defense, and you're telling me that they have to spend twice that amount or almost twice that amount on just the interest payment alone on the national debt, I don't think that they can tolerate that, or at least they can't tolerate that for long. So there is enormous pressure on the Fed to cut rates. But again, as I said, like, they just don't see the enough justification at the moment. But I feel like by the time that July rolls around, there's two more meetings. There's one in June, and then the July one is after that. By the time July rolls around, we'll see. Maybe we'll get a cut then. But if not, I think by September they'll definitely want to cut. And also, to back up that theory, if you look at oil prices, oil has actually come down today. So it's fallen below $80 a barrel last time I checked. And I think that is also good news for deflation, right? Because I know, like, people say that they strip out energy in the core CPI, but to be honest, like, you can't strip out the energy, right? Because like, oil is in everything, right? Like, all the goods needs to be transported by like diesel trucks and stuff like that. So like, there's just no way you can separate energy costs from general inflation, no matter how hard you try, because it's embedded in everything, right? So the fact that oil is coming down, I think there will be good news for both headline CPI and core CPI. And yeah, I think like the narrative is just gone ahead of us, right? So like in the beginning of the year, we had a lot of people say that there was going to be 7 rate cuts this year, and like that came like nowhere near to being true, right? And so far we're in May already, and there's been 0 rate cuts. But now I'm seeing people online say that there's going to be a rate hike sometime down the line, which I don't think is going to happen either, right? The narrative's completely flipped from greed to fear now, but I think like it's wrong on both the extremes, right? So the truth is probably somewhere in between, which again, as I said, is probably going to be 2 rate cuts at least. So yeah, I'm standing by that, and I think it's going to happen. So that's my thoughts on the Fed. In terms of Bitcoin, again, like there's not that much to be said. I think the fact that they're going to cut rates sometime soon, it's going to be good for Bitcoin, right? And it's just the fact that they're slowing down quantitative tightening is going to be good for Bitcoin, and it's going to be good for the stock market in general as well, right? So yeah, I think that like there are people who are saying that the cycle is over for Bitcoin because Bitcoin dropped 20%. Like, look, the cycle is not over, right? And I don't want to make that sound like financial advice. Like maybe I could be wrong, right? But I highly doubt that I am wrong on that. Like the cycle, in my opinion, is very far from being over since we literally just had the halving like 10 days ago. So we haven't gotten to the real parabolic part of Bitcoin's rise yet. And it's just, fear taking over, and people are just being irrational because they're afraid. And a lot of people have never seen a 20% drop, like I said, right? So that can be daunting, but I don't think that that's rational. So yeah, basically that's what I think about Bitcoin. It's higher prices are going to come later on, in my opinion, not financial advice. And lastly, Bitfarms. Yeah. So, like as I said, they didn't have to publish this update on May 1st, but I appreciate the fact that they did. And it shows that they have really nothing to hide. And they're really proud of the achievements that they've done. And I've always been really bullish on the management team of Bitfarms because they have been consistently able to execute above and beyond expectations. So I have no reason to doubt that they won't be able to achieve their goals, right? So they're saying that they're trying to reach 21 exahash by the end of 2024, or their goal is to reach 21 exahash, and I think that they are going to hit that. And I think they also said that they're aiming for 12 exahash by the end of June. So we'll see about that, but pretty bullish on that. And I think that if they just hit all the targets that they promise, then the stock price right now is a joke compared to what it will be, right? And especially because Bitfarms is also a smaller market cap, so the law of large numbers it applies less to Bitfarms than it does to, let's say, a Mara or a Riot, which are already multi-billion-dollar companies, right? So it's much easier for Bitfarms to double than it is for Marathon to double, right? So that's why I chose to buy Bitfarms instead of Marathon. And again, I'm not trying to bag on Marathon. I think they're doing pretty well as well. But yeah, I'd rather go with Bitfarms than Marathon just because I think there's a more risk, more reward, just because it's a smaller market cap with Bitfarms. And yeah, basically like the updates are nice, and I'm liking what I see here. So that's all I have to say about Bitfarms. And maybe one last tangent before we move on to our last story. This isn't related to the FOMC or anything like that, but I just found this headline pretty interesting, which is that the head of the ETF departments at both Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have both resigned. And I'm not sure if this happened just today or if this was like, announced a while ago and we're just picking up on it now. But if you guys recall, when when the BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF and among other ETFs were approved back in January, there was a big debate about whether or not like a company should support it, right? So BlackRock went all in on supporting the Bitcoin spot Bitcoin ETF. And then Vanguard kind of took the opposite route of that, where Vanguard was totally against it. And in fact, Vanguard has a brokerage platform, and they banned their users from buying the spot Bitcoin ETF on their brokerage platform. So not only did they not make a Bitcoin ETF themselves, they banned their customers from being able to buy other companies' spot Bitcoin ETF, and that made a lot of people angry, right? And then a lot of people pointed out, is like, hey, you're not allowing the spot Bitcoin ETF, but you're allowing the futures Bitcoin ETFs. Like, what gives, right? And then Vanguard doubles down, and they go, oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, let's delist those too. So they delisted the futures ETFs as well. So they went the exact opposite way. It's like when you go on a highway and you realize that you're on like the wrong direction on the highway and you're driving like against the traffic, and instead of backing out and like getting off the highway, you just drive further in and head on traffic, right? So after that, mysteriously, or coincidentally, the CEO of Vanguard announced that he was retiring after 20 or so years. I think he was the CEO of Vanguard. So he's suddenly announcing his retirement by the end of this year. And the rumor is that the timing is too suspicious, right? Like, the rumor is that he was pushed out because he was so against the Bitcoin ETFs. And what happened after BlackRock was approved for launching a spot Bitcoin ETF? Well, BlackRock is raking in a bunch of money, and Vanguard they lost a bunch of customers because a lot of people got pissed and left. And they don't have an ETF themselves, so they're not making money on that. So I bet shareholders were not too happy about that. And then also Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are also two companies that were not very supportive of Bitcoin, let's just say, in the past, especially JP Morgan, whose CEO Jamie Dimon consistently and still to this day bashes Bitcoin every chance he gets. It seems like maybe the tide is turning against these heads of the ETFs department at JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. What do you guys think about this story? Do you guys think that the resignations of these two gentlemen had anything to do with like their opposition to Bitcoin spot ETFs? And what do you think of companies and spot Bitcoin ETFs in general? Like, should companies embrace it and stuff like that, or what do you think?
Ironically, I think it's relatively coincidental, but in the core, deep down of everything, we don't truly know what happened with these three people from like Vanguard, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs. But the coincidence is interesting. I'll say that. Like, they just so happened to retire, exit, and leave all at the same time. Maybe there was like a board meeting. This is only by guess. And so many other people were for it, and then they just simply could not take it and weren't about it and just wanted to leave, or they were just outsed out. I mean, no one knows for sure, but these are all just kind of possibilities. And what was your other question again? Sorry.
Yeah, like, what do you think about like Bitcoin spot ETFs in general? Is it like good for Bitcoin? Is it good for like investors? And should companies embrace it, or or do you think Vanguard's maybe justified in trying to protect their customers from the volatility that is Bitcoin?
Um, like, I definitely think it should be like implemented, like any like Bitcoin ETFs of such matter. I feel like it's a really good diversification tool. If you look in the grand scheme of things of the price of Bitcoin, yeah, sure, it has its lows, highs, but at the end of the day, it still progressively goes upwards. So to not even bat an eye and think about like investing a small portion of your portfolio, or like maybe a more bullish part of your portfolio, depending on like what kind of person you are, like I think it's quite ridiculous. I think people should be exposed to Bitcoin, and like whether that be like Bitcoin ETFs for us like Canadians, so it could be tax free. And I know, pretty sure there's tax free accounts in the States too. Yeah, that might also be the way too. And for Vanguard not approving it is pretty questionable. I think it's like when there's like old people that still use flip phones, it's kind of like, I think at some point you probably have to get with the times, because time is just gonna fly through you. So you might as well just innovate yourself and always adapt to like what's going on. Like nowadays it's like AI and stuff, and then we just have to work with it. But yeah, I think maybe Vanguard needs to innovate a bit more. Maybe traditional ways of thinking may not be so good in this situation.
Yeah, I'd say you either get with the times, you get left behind, and I think that I think that this maybe does suggest that there is some they were not keeping up with the times, and it was time for them to move on. And then with regards to what was the other question? I already forgot. I got the memory of a goldfish.
Yeah, Vanguard, like being against Bitcoin.
Oh
and
yeah,
think that they're justified in protecting their clients from the supposed volatility, or is it absolutely unreasonable and Vanguard's just a dinosaur? And
I think they should let people make their own decision if they are able to handle Bitcoin's volatility, rather than using their hand of God to decide that they are in charge. And then I think the Bitcoin ETFs in general are very, very good overall, because it gives people an opportunity to get exposure to Bitcoin without having to go through all of the hassle of setting up and using wallets, etc. So,
and I totally agree with what you guys said. And just to add kind of maybe my own thoughts to this, yeah, I definitely do think it's too coincidental to be like for these companies, for these gentlemen to be just like coincidentally leaving just when they, you know, just when their companies had like, you know, anti-Bitcoin stances. And like, I think, yeah, as I think Dom or Tristan, one of you implied that there has to have been like a boardroom meeting or something being like, hey, like you either have to support, like BlackRock is making so much money and we're not making money. So you either have to get with the times or you have to, you know, leave. And then I guess these gentlemen, they didn't want to, or maybe they weren't even given the choice, right? Maybe they were just pushed out and they were just like, yeah, we don't want you here because you're so against this. And your heart is not going to be in it if we launch a Bitcoin ETF. So we're going to replace you, and then we're going to get someone else who's bullish on Bitcoin, and then we're going to make them run the Bitcoin ETF, or we're going to make them run the ETF department in general. So I think that that's probably what happened. Again, I don't have any insider information. I'm just totally speculating. In terms of Vanguard, yeah, I do think that they made a huge mistake, right? They pissed off a lot of their customers and they pushed out a lot of their customers. And it's never a good idea from a business perspective to like alienate a bunch of your customers for like some ideological like standpoint, right? So the fact is that you have to give people choice, right? So for example, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there was a company called Nikola Motors, and I think they're still a company somehow. But basically, they were like a total fraud. They made supposedly electric vehicles or electric semi trucks, and their electric semi was supposed to compete with Tesla, but it just didn't work. So they like filmed a promotional video where they hauled the semi truck, the one that didn't work, to the top of a hill and they rolled it down the hill. So it was not like powered at all. It was just rolling down the hill. And then they filmed it and like implied in the video that, you know, it was a working prototype and stuff like that. Yeah, basically like the founder, Trevor Milton, I think his name is, he went to jail, right? He just got sentenced for committing fraud. And like, you know, you didn't have to kind of sit through the whole episode to tell that Nikola was a fraud, because for people like me who have been invested in companies like Tesla for a long time, we know what is real innovation and what is most likely a fraud, right? And when you show Nikola to like a person who understands like the EV industry and stuff like that, because they've been invested in Tesla, for a long time, like they could see like right through it, right? And I don't want to like, brag or anything, but like I saw right through it, right? And it's like, yeah, basically these companies, like Nikola, they're pretty clearly committing fraud, right? And allegedly committing fraud, like at the time, because it wasn't proven at the time. But even for companies like Nikola, I would not be supportive if a brokerage firm was just like, hey, we think this is a fraud, we're going to delist the stock, because I think investors need the option to vote with their money, right? So I'm taking a libertarian stance on this. Of course, like if the company was, if the company itself, because in Nicola's case, it was kind of complicated because it was like the CEO. Maybe you could argue that the company was okay, but the CEO was committing fraud. But even then, I think that, until innocent, until proven guilty, and even in that extreme case, I would not be for a company delisting Nikola from their brokerage when it's not delisted from the stock exchange or anything like that, just because the company made a judgment call on behalf of the client, right? So like, I don't want that. I don't want the company to kind of step in and protect the investor. I want the investor to take their own responsibility and make their own decision. Maybe that's a bit of a hot take, but I don't know. Like, Dom, what do you think?
To piggyback onto that too, it's like, and like Tristan as well, I don't think it's right to give people the choice to not be able to do something at all. I think it's quite ridiculous. Like, I feel like people have like different situations and should be responsible if something does negatively happen to them. So stripping them of any choice is just not right. And I didn't know about that Nikola like story, like rolling down a car and then he gets like it's all this fraud business. I think that's pretty funny, but I mean, it is what it is. Like, I don't know why people go through those extents, but I don't know. Funny story.
Well, what do you think? Like, I don't know if you like went to the bathroom or something, so I don't know if you like heard most of that, but like
I could hear. Yeah.
What did you think of the like the Nikola thing?
Yeah.
Or anything?
I don't think that they should be like, unless Nikola is getting delisted. I don't think they should be deciding that Nikola is something that you shouldn't be allowed to buy, even if it is a bad thing.
The point
right?
is that like, the SEC should be the one that decides, right? Like, not
Yeah.
the brokerage itself. Like, if the SEC says, hey, like, we're shutting this company down because they're committing fraud, then fine, right? But like, it's like the brokerage makes, in the Vanguard's case, it was like the brokerage making a decision. It's like, hey, like, we think that Bitcoin is like, tulips or whatever, so we're shutting it, like we're delisting like all the Bitcoin ETFs, and we don't even want you to invest in the futures ETF because we just don't want anything to do with Bitcoin, like on behalf of their clients, right? That they made that decision, and I think that that's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think it's the Vanguard's place to determine what I should or shouldn't be allowed to buy. The SEC has that role for a reason, and Vanguard should butt out. It's kind of my opinion on that front.
Now, with that story wrapped up, if you guys are ready, we do have to move on to the next story for time's sake. So this is kind of the controversial story that hopefully won't get us canceled, but I'll try to be fair and unbiased as I can. So this story is, of course, about the campus protests against Israel, the pro-Palestinian protests that I think originally started at Columbia University, but it spread to multiple universities all across the United States, and even some universities in Canada right here at home, such as McGill University, I think is one of the big Canadian universities that has a big pro-Palestinian protest camp out as well. So basically, what happened is the students of these universities at Columbia or where else, they want the universities to basically divest their investments with anything to do with Israel, right? So, or specifically, they say it's companies that are supportive of the Israeli military, but like, you maybe can make an argument that like anything that supports the Israeli economy is also maybe in that category, right? So basically, these students just want the university to cut ties with Israel because of what's going on in the Israel-Gaza conflict. But it's controversial because there's extremists on both sides, right? And I'm gonna try and present the story from both sides. So first, I'm gonna present sort of the arguments against these pro-Palestinian protesters and why this shouldn't be happening or why this is bad, right? So this is an example. The first photo is protesters that are basically fighting the police officers. You can see that this man has like a big jug that says Gaza on it. I can't really read the other words, but basically a pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza protester who's just like trying to like attack the police with this like big water jug. And then you have people who are masked, so they're wearing these I think they're called like kifas or kifas. It's like a Arabian kind of scarf or headdress, and then they're like using it to wrap their face to conceal their identity because they don't want like people to know who they are. And then they're like smashing windows and graffitiing everything and causing a lot of vandalism and stuff. And then you have like again protesters pushing back against the police. And then you have like people that are taking down the American flag. And I'm talking about this is happening in America, right? So they're taking down the American flags and putting up a Palestinian flag, which a lot of people, Americans specifically, might have a problem with, right? Because this seems like it's, treason, so to speak, right? I don't know how else you can interpret it, but yeah, basically there's a lot of that happening. But yeah, that's basically kind of the arguments against these protesters. Is like they're being violent, they're being disruptive, they're a lot of them are shouting supposedly anti-Semitic slogans as well. So a lot of Jewish students on these campuses, they report feeling unsafe because these protesters are like blocking roads and blocking access to certain buildings, and some of them might be shouting anti-Semitic slogans, right? So that's kind of the argument against. But you have the protesters side who says like, hey, there's always going to be extremists at every rally, right? There's always going to be people who take it too far, and like anti-Semitism is not the goal here, right? The goal is to protest against Israel, the state, who's perpetrating this war on Gaza, who's killed a lot of civilians, tens of thousands of them, right? And a lot of people are kind of likening this to the Vietnam War and the response on university campuses. So if you guys remember that piece of history during the American involvement in Vietnam, it sparked kind of the hippie movement to make love, not war. And that was kind of their slogan. And a lot of, university campuses specifically had these big protests against the US government for their involvement in the Vietnam War. So the pro-Palestinian protesters are basically saying, look, this is freedom of speech, first of all. And second of all, this is not anything new. This is not anything different. We're protesting this the killing of civilians in Gaza. We're protesting like this big supposed so-called genocide, right? And again, maybe there's a debate as to whether or not it is genocide. So I'll leave that debate off to the side for 1 second, but it's just basically it's like, hey, this is just like another Vietnam. This is not anything like super different. This is just like a protest against this the senseless killing of civilians. So yeah, this is a controversial topic, and this is like a very nuanced topic. So I just kind of maybe want to get you guys' opinions on these. Like, do you guys support the protest, or are you guys against it? If you were a university student, would you go to one of these protests, or would you like be more on the side of like the police maybe shutting down these protests because some of them are turning violent and threatening Jewish students? Like, what do you guys think in general?
So I think in general, with staying as like non-neutral, like, or no, hold on, with staying as neutral as possible. Like, I hope everything is all good, like with every situation we're not. I think people have the right to speak out, but I think to a certain extent, if there's a lot of like situations or mishaps or too much like violence in these protests or situations that are like disrupting people's everyday lives or etc. and so forth and so on. I think maybe there should be like a little bit of a resistance from like the government, but I think people being able to express what they want to express is like necessary. And the only thing I could say is I hope everything, like all as well as ends well. Like I just hope everything will be okay. I don't know. I just want to stay as neutral as possible, but yeah, at the end of the day, I hope all is good. So I'll leave it at that.
Would you go to one of the protests? Don't dodge that question, because I'm gonna answer that question too. So like, if I'm gonna answer it, you all should answer it too.
When I go to one of those protests, I'll be honest, like it sounds like insensitive, but I feel like I have like, oh god, I'm a DICK, but I feel like I'd rather go to another place or another thing in my life instead of going these protests. I'm not that much of a fight for the rights kind of guy. I'm just like, I exist here in Canada, but yeah, that's just my opinion. So I'll stay neutral. Hope all is okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here now. I think it's pretty clear that I think all of us agree, or maybe I'm speaking for you guys, but I think generally there is a pretty wide consensus that people should be allowed to protest and they should be allowed to communicate their displeasure with the way things are being handled and do so in a peaceful and hopefully productive manner. And I think that it's pretty clear that there are some bad actors, as there always seems to be bad actors in every sort of protest. And I think one thing with that is that I've never understood why the good actor protesters don't feed the bad actor protesters to the government or to the cops, in the sense of like, I never understood why, like, even with regards to like other protests, like the trucker convoy, for instance, like, when there's a bad actor, I feel like it is in both sides' interest that the bad actor be removed, right? So if there's someone vandalizing, someone destroying stuff, someone graffitiing things, I feel like, in my opinion, it would be good for the protesters for that person to no longer be there, because that person is clearly giving an impression that you guys are more violent and doing things and causing property damage and thus being a problem, when you're not. The majority of you are not, right? So you would want them removed as a protester. Well, the cops also are like, obviously, we don't want property damage occurring because that is a crime. And then it's in their best interest to remove them. So I never really quite understood why they don't get I don't know, kind of served up by the protesters, the good actor protesters, but maybe I'm just not understanding on that front. So I think it's unfortunate that there's bad actors in these protests, because I think that they have a right to make the protests, and I think that obviously there is a real problem occurring, in the sense of like, anything with regards to civilian casualties, unnecessary civilian casualties, is going to be a problem. It's not a good thing. And I can see the kind of similarity between this and the Vietnam War in that regard, as Andy was kind of saying. Right. So I understand where they're coming from. I think maybe part of it is that there is so much more access to social media and stuff to communicate images of the bad actors, and then using that as, look at, this is the entire protest, and kind of displaying that. Whereas I feel like maybe in the Vietnam era, there was not quite the same level of coverage, which meant that you would see the majority of the people rather than the singular bad acts. You would see more of the overall group who were by and large being peaceful. And I think that that's like, and I mean, like, this kind of flows into like the free, if I just kind of talk about other examples of protests, like with the trucker convoy, how like that one guy with the Nazi flag was like such a big deal, right? Whereas like if there was a normal team news coverage for it, say in like a Vietnam War era, they may not have caught that because of the difficulty to catch everything with news coverage, right? And like because the majority of the people were being peaceful and were not necessarily being a problem, the singular bad actors are now being put more on display now than they ever have in the past. So I think that they are, well, like I think it's a worthy cause to be protesting, and I don't think that there should be people who are being anti-Semitic, etc., or anything. I think it's, in my mind at least, it's pretty clear that the issues would be with the methods that the Israeli military is using in its actions in Gaza, not Jewish people as a whole, right? But I feel like people seem to be missing that, and it's kind of similar to how, after like 9/11, for instance, everyone was being, there were lots of people being anti-Muslim because of their perception that, as a result of the 9/11 attacks. It's just like it's unfortunate the way that people try and group everyone in a category that just happens to be in that same religion or whatever as some bad actors, and wraps them all together into one bad blob, even though they're obviously there's a wide range of people in that religion or whatever group it is, and they are not all going to be on one side or the other of this issue. So yeah, I think it's just unfortunate.
Would you go to one of these protests? $1 million question.
I'm not sure. Like I don't know. I would consider going to view. I don't know if I would necessarily go as a protester, because I feel like I lack sufficient knowledge to really give enough value with my being there, if that makes sense. Like I feel like I don't know enough to really provide much value besides maybe just moral support. And I also just don't think that I don't think protesting actually ends up getting much done by and large. So I think part of that is just the fact that there is a tremendous amount of time commitment to go to these sorts of events with very little prospective gain, because it's not like you're going to flip the Canadian government, even, let alone convince the Israeli government to stop what they're doing, right? So in my mind, at least, I don't see you having much impact. And I think that's part of my problem with my attendance, is that I don't see myself making a big impact. So I don't know. That's just kind of what I'm thinking. Maybe I would go, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. It's difficult to say.
Yeah. So here's my opinion on this, right? And I think there's a lot of nuance that's missing from like a lot of this pro-Palestinian protests and stuff. And what I mean by that is, well, first of all, I support free speech, right? So I support the right to protest. So if you want to camp out on like a university campus, I think you should have the right to do that. However, I'm really against this like vandalism, right? Like people smashing windows and people just burglarizing like their own school and blocking buildings and like graffitiing everything. So I really don't see how that helps their cause. And yeah, I personally would not go to one of these protests just because. I mean, I think again, there's a lot of like I feel like people take a very one-sided look on these issues, right? So I saw like a sign that from one of the protesters that says that the like Israel-Gaza conflict didn't start on October 7th. it started in 1948, which is the year that Israel was founded, right? But the truth is that's not correct either, because the conflict didn't start in 1948. This conflict is thousands of years old, right? And this conflict has been going on since like literally the Roman times. So I think it's both incorrect to say that it started in 1948, and is also incorrect to say it started on October 7th. So I think this is like what a lot of like people on both sides don't understand, right? Both the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli people, is that there's like Israel. I feel like you have to kind of acknowledge Israel's right to exist, right? Because like again, you can make an argument that they stole the land from the Palestinians and then they like occupied the land or whatever, right? But the fact is that if you want to make that argument, then like can you make the argument that like the people here in Canada are occupiers of Aboriginal land, right? Because like we kind of came over and took their land, right? So but it's like the people who are born in Canada natively these days, and who are not native by blood, like where are they going to go, right? Like should we just kick everyone out of Canada and give it all back to the Aboriginals, right? So it's kind of like the same idea with Israel. It's like, yeah, like you can make an argument that they stole the land in 1948, but like a lot of people were born after 1948. So it's like, what do you do with those people who are born and raised in Israel? Where are they going to go if you kick them out and give the land all back to the Palestinians, right? And I think that that's kind of the nuance that's missing from a lot of this like pro-Palestinian protests. And if you guys look at one of the images, the one with the poster, it says from the river to the sea, right? So that's a slogan that the pro-Palestinian crowd, some of them, not all of them, right? Some of them like to chant. And the full phrase, I believe, is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And basically what the people who are the pro-Israeli people are saying that, look, this is a call for the destruction of Israel and the genocide of Israelis, because from the river to the sea implies from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which is all the land in what is now Israel, right? So if that land is like all going to be given back to Palestine, then it's like where are the Israelis going to go, right? And the implication is that, if you chant that phrase, you support the genocide of Israelis, right? So it's just like you want to get rid of all the Israelis and give the land all to Palestinians. So I think there is some merit to that argument. I'm not sure if you guys would agree to that. Maybe you guys would disagree, but I think that phrase is problematic, and it's just concerning to me to see this phrase being shouted as a slogan on university campuses, right? And a lot of these people, I understand, they're protesting against the killing of civilians, which I don't think anybody supports, right? Like, unless you ask like the most extreme pro-Israeli, like, you have to be like Israeli military official at this point to like, actually be for killing civilians. But like, I think even people who are pro-Israeli, like in the United States and in Canada, I don't think that if you actually ask them, I don't think they actually support the killing of Palestinian civilians, right? But it's like, look, there's Israel, and then there's Palestine, and then there's only so much land, and it's like we could keep killing each other or we can get along. And these phrases like from the river to the sea, it's really not helpful, because you're implying that you want to wipe out the other person in order to like take back your land. And it's kind of like the exact same argument that is being used on the opposite side, where like, some Israeli extremists are saying that they want to wipe out the Palestinians and take all the land for themselves, right? So it's kind of like, an eye for an eye, make the whole world blind kind of thing, right? In my opinion. So I'm really against like the use of these slogans, and I would be against the use of like, Israeli slogans that imply for the destruction of Palestine as well, right? So that's another thing. And yeah, in terms of comparisons to the Vietnam War, this is also like kind of nuanced, because not every event obviously is going to be the same, right? So I think the problem and the big difference between like the protests against Vietnam War and the pro-Palestinian protests is that the pro-Palestinian protests are like hovering dangerously close to persecuting like a specific group of people, right? And again, I'm not saying that the vast majority of pro-Palestinian people are anti-Semitic, but there has been a lot of like examples that I've seen where people are shouting anti-Semitic slogans and targeting Jewish people. And like I think there was like one professor at I think it was like New York or Columbia or something that was he was a Jewish guy. He's a professor, and his card basically got deactivated because he made a speech that was pro-Israel, right? So he made a pro-Israel speech, and then the school's like superintendent or something, they deactivated his card and they wouldn't let him into his office. I just see kind of that stuff going on, and it's not like a great sign. And I think that's like the difference between like maybe the pro-Palestinian, the anti like Vietnam people, is that the anti-Vietnam people, they like anti-Vietnam war, not anti-Vietnam, but like the anti-Vietnam war people, they didn't like, it wasn't about like race. It wasn't about as much about ethnicity, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of a big difference that we should maybe pay attention to. And overall, again, I agree with what Dom said. It's just an unfortunate situation. I really don't want to see it get even more violent than it already is, because there's already instances of like people getting hurt and stuff like that. And this is America, right? So eventually, like, somebody might pull a gun, right? I'm just saying, right? I'm not wishing for that to happen, but obviously, right? But I'm just saying that that's a real possibility. And yeah, I just don't want to see this escalate. And I just think that a lot of these, like, people who are like poli-sci majors, right? Or like these arts majors, humanities majors, who are supposed to understand the nuance of, human nature and psychology and all this stuff, they tend to be the most extreme crowd, right? Like, that's just a fact. I'm not trying to like bash art students. I'm not trying to like, throw shade. It's just a fact, right? Like, if you interview like people and what they study, I feel like a lot of the people who study maybe like STEM fields like engineering, they tend to be a little bit more nuanced in terms of their opinions, and then the arts majors are like the most extreme. So maybe that's another problem that we can talk about if you guys want. It's like, what's wrong with our humanities departments all across North American universities, where we kind of breed these people who are supposedly experts in humanities and politics and all this stuff, and they tend to take the most extreme view possible, right? In terms of like anything politics related. But it's just a trend that I've noticed. Again, like, if you have the data that like prove me wrong, then please share it. But I've noticed that trend, right? That the people who with the extreme views tends to be arts majors. But anyways, let me toss the question back to you guys. I've said a lot. Do you guys have anything to add or any additional comments?
I think nowadays we're all just a bunch of soft. No, I'm not gonna say it, but you get where I'm going. Yeah, I think it's just maybe with like social media, there's a lot more room for expression. Like, and then we do live in Canada, and like I guess the United States too, where freedom of speech is prevalent. Is that the word? So as time progresses, and then people feel more open and relatable, and feel like they have more of a voice, people have like different outlets to express, and like have these like niches and genres that they tend to join, and then I guess these stereotypes begin to happen. Like, stereotypes had to be created from somewhere, so over time these were developed. It's not like a stereotype doesn't like mean you're that specific stereotype and only that type of person. You can be your own person, like have other attributes of your characteristics. But yeah, I feel like boomers will always look down on us, being like, you guys are so soft. Back in my day, yada yada yada, we used to do this, like walk 50 kilometers to school or something, you know what I mean? So
You calling me a boomer, Dom?
no. I'm just like using it as like a reference example. Or I'm not calling you a boomer, but yeah, we just have room to be more expressive, and maybe the air is different from 30, 40 years ago. It's hard to explain, but yeah, these are the times now. It is what it is.
I think a big factor with that in general is the fact that there's a big prevalence of echo chambers, and that's not necessarily just a art student or something to that effect perspective, but there is a lot of there's a very high prevalence of people finding themselves in echo chambers where everyone just agrees with what they have to say and no one challenges them, or when they are challenged, it's only in an adversarial relationship where there's no opportunities for them to develop any nuance to their opinions because no one is ever actually challenging your opinion with a reasoned argument. And I think that the prevalence of echo chambers is something that has been growing rapidly with the rise of social media. And we can see that all across the board, whether it's left leaning, right leaning. There's clearly groups where there are huge right wing bias, where everyone is all like, "Oh yeah, we're on the same page. This is how the world works." Well, there's other groups where the world seems to work completely different, and everyone only stays within their bubble and doesn't communicate and try and understand the other groups because and this is part of the reason why I think that politics in particular has gotten so bipartisan is because the ability to have a discussion where
you mean non-bipartisan, like, because bipartisan means that the two parties work together.
Oh yeah, sorry, non-bipartisan. Yeah. Like they're basically like the parties are moving into their own. Like, I feel like in the past there was more of like a Venn diagram of stuff where like the parties could kind of agree on some things. They had different opinions and other things, but sometimes they could come to an agreement on something. Whereas I feel like now those Venn diagrams are increasingly just moving apart. And I guess that's kind of more politics, but I think that's also the case in like just general people. And I think that what you're describing, Andy, with the art students is that the arts tends to be more left-leaning in general. And because they tends to be more because it tends to be more left-leaning, and because it's kind of its own little group as it is, there tends to be they tend to be part of an echo chamber in there, in which case they don't get exposed to reasonable other people who will discuss, and they don't have anyone challenging their beliefs and offering a differing position from a reasonable perspective where they can both have a discussion rather than argument. And I think that is just an example of how we're kind of all getting in these echo chambers. And so I don't think that it's necessarily the arts is having particularly extremist views in the sense of like, I don't think that they're different, really. I think that they're just a vocal group that tends to have that's in its own echo chamber, that tends to be very vocal, so you may hear about it more. And again, I'm not saying that they're wrong to have the opinions that they have. I'm just saying that I think it's pretty clear to me, and I want to clarify, preface this also by saying that like I have definitely existed within echo chambers, right? So I'm not saying that if you are within an echo chamber, there's anything wrong with you, right? I just want to clarify that. But I think that there's a lot of people who are existing within these kind of like these echo chambers, and I think that is really harming our ability to, like, as countries, as people, it's really harming our ability to come to agreements and kind of what's the word? C word. Cooperate and like
reach a consensus, right?
Yeah, reach a consensus. Come to an agreement. Like come to some sort of general like end the conversation with maybe there's still some things that you disagree on, but people can come to the conclusion that most people are pretty reasonable. Most people are not crazy, and most people have something of value to bring. And I feel like a lot of the time once we're in these echo chambers, people seem to forget that people who you disagree with have a lot to bring to the table, just as much as you do. So I think it's important to have us discuss with both sides, or else we're all going to be in a worse situation by and large.
Like I said, this is like the lack of nuance thing that I was talking about, right? So
yeah,
this was brought up in the All In podcast, so this wasn't like my original point, but I really agree with what I think it was Chamath Palihapitiya, who's one of the hosts on the All In podcast, who brought this up. Basically, like, the problem with a lot of these pro-Palestinian, and I'm sure it occurs on the pro-Israeli side as well, is that like we've segmented the Israelis and the Palestinians to the oppressed and the oppressor, right? So if you're an Israeli, then you're an oppressor. If you're a Palestinian, then you're oppressed. And if you're oppressed, you're automatically like, the good guy. And if you're an oppressor, then you're automatically a bad guy. So therefore, if you're Israeli, then you're a bad guy. If you're Palestinian, then you're a good guy. Well, the truth is more nuanced to that, right? Because again, like Hamas, the group who runs Gaza, is a designated terrorist organization who's recognized as a terrorist organization by both the United States and by Canada, right? So let me just make that clear, right? And it's like they've done terroristic activities against Israel for the sake of Palestinian liberation, but they attacked civilians, and they shot up this music festival on October 7th and led to 200 or 300 deaths or something, all of them civilians, right? So, it's just kind of we're dangerously crossing the line into, supporting Hamas with these pro-Palestinian protests, where it's like, if you're pro-Israeli, then you're automatically an oppressor. And if you're Palestinian, even though like you're Hamas, you're automatically a freedom fighter. And I just think that that's like too simplistic of a view, and it's a dangerous view to have, where you kind of just put everybody into one bucket and you put everyone else into another bucket, and there's kind of no gray area in between. I think that that's like a huge issue. But yeah, anyways, Dom, you wanted to say something?
No, it's just to piggyback on like Tristan's whole like echo chamber like nuance or situation that he was speaking of. Like for like visual example, if you're like an Ontarian or something, let's say for example, art students are from like OCAD, and you're surrounded in that OCAD type environment. So like the people you communicate with, you tend to be like similar and stereotypes typically like the same. So you have like the same views or whatnot. And you don't typically go to Ryerson because that's like a whole different view. I think to both parties, you don't see like the other school very often, but you find that the people that you talk to agree with you and think the same way and feel like they're right about something. And then the people from Ryerson see things from a different way, and then you don't think that they're right about certain things specifically. I don't know if this is like relatable at all, but I feel like if there's like more intercommunication, then both people can understand each other more and figure out like why both people feel right. But I didn't know about the shooting part and like the civilian. That's kind of extreme. I didn't know, but maybe both parties feel like they're right in certain aspects, and some sort of communication could be like figured out to figure out like some things. But I think maybe some things are a bit far. So I don't have enough knowledge about like the current situation that's going on in Palestine, Gaza, and Israel. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm gonna stop now. So yeah, I'm good.
Stop before you get yourself canceled. Great idea. Tristan,
No.
you have anything else to add, or shall we move on?
No, I think I'm pretty much covered. Like I think it's really comes down to that kind of echo chamber. And I don't want to suggest that there is not valid arguments for either side. And I think I do want to preface this by saying that I think that some arguments are more valid than others, and at least in my mind. I'll let you guys be the decider of what I mean by that, but I'll say that I think that there's definitely arguments that are much more compelling than other arguments in this conflict, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great opinions. Dom, you were gonna say something?
Well, I was just gonna say, I know it's TMU, excuse me, it's Toronto Metropolitan University. I said Ryerson before. I'm a little millennial here, Zillennial, whatever. So besides the point,
Ryerson, I really don't like the name change, but that's a whole nother ball game.
I didn't even notice.
That's a whole other rabbit hole. But kind of like how Tristan was talking about politics, I think Andy will bring it up once more right about now. So we'll see that.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue into our next story, talking about political polarization and stuff like that. Because I am very concerned about political polarization, not only in the United States, but here in our own country, Canada, right? So for our American friends, or for anyone who's not from Canada, who doesn't understand how like the House of Commons in Canada works, so like it's way different than the House of Representatives in the United States, right? So in the House of Representatives in the United States, the Speaker is like the leader or one of the leaders of like one of the parties, right? And it's a very partisan role, and it's supposed to be a partisan role. It's like, you know, if you have the House majority, then you get your guy in the like in the House of Representatives as the Speaker, and then like, you know, they're supposed to be like the leader who passes legislation and all that stuff, and that's completely like the norm. However, in Canada, our system works a lot differently, where the House of Commons is still divided between, you know, we have essentially a two-party system, although like our third party is a lot bigger than what the United States' third party is. But in Canada, we still have, you know, kind of two sides, right? The governing party and the opposition, and we still have a speaker. But the difference is that the speaker is supposed to resign their post, like they usually is an MP before they become speaker, but they're supposed to resign their post as an MP and become a non-partisan kind of referee when dealing with the two parties, right? So it's kind of like the two parties are, you know, slandering each other and like talking shit about each other. The referee is supposed to be like, hey, like, you know, let's have decorum. Let's bring it back to the topic if it gets off topic, and then let's, you know, just have a conversation and make sure that each party actually answers the questions and whatnot, right? So at least that's the idea of the Speaker of the House of Canada. However, what happened, I think this was like yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, but yeah, yesterday, April 30th, this event happened, and I'll tell you what the event is, that made the current speaker, his name is Greg Fergus, that made Fergus seem like he's not maybe as non-partisan as he should be. So I'll tell you the story and let you be the judge of it. Okay, so basically, there was a debate. It was a question period, which is like, you know, when the two sides, you know, ask each other hypothetical questions and like rhetorical questions as like, you know, thinly veiled insults. Basically, that's how I describe question period, right? So like, you know, as usual, Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the official opposition, the Conservative Party, was lobbying insults at Justin Trudeau of the Liberal Party, who's our current prime minister, and then Trudeau is lobbying insults back, right? Completely normal a course of events. However, at one point, Pierre Poilievre called Trudeau a wacko. And I'll let you kind of maybe be the interpreter of what wacko exactly means. But you know, to me that means like, you know, a crazy person or something like along those lines, right? But apparently this was a word that the Speaker of the House, Greg Fergus, had a big issue with, and he asked Pierre Poilievre to withdraw calling Trudeau a wacko. And Pierre Poilievre, instead of withdrawing it, he proposed that he would instead replaced the word wacko with extremist. And then this wasn't good enough for Fergus, who asked Pierre Poilievre to withdraw the whole statement. And I think Pierre Poilievre, he responded by replacing extremist with another word. I forget what the other word was, but like basically he refused to withdraw the statement. And because Pierre Poilievre refused to withdraw the statement, Greg Fergus banned Pierre from the House of Commons for the rest of the day yesterday. So basically kicked him out for, basically insulting Justin Trudeau. And according to him, this was, a perfectly fine thing to do because it was like not parliamentary, according to Fergus. But this decision has been criticized by many people. Obviously, the Conservatives criticized this, and Pierre Poilievre criticized it himself, as well, obviously, right? So Pierre was saying how, this was totally partisan. This was like he was speaking for Trudeau. He's just a Liberal MP still, basically what you would expect, right? But what's maybe more interesting, because you would expect Pierre to be angry about this, right? That's not a surprise. But what is maybe a bit of a surprise is Tom Mulcair, who, if you guys remember, was the former NDP leader. So the NDP is the party that's to the left of Trudeau, Liberals, right? So if anything, like they're even more left. So they're even further apart from the Conservatives than the Liberals are. So Mulcair, surprisingly, came out against this and said that Fergus failed completely and displayed blatant partisanship for ejecting Pierre Poilievre. So he actually came out kind of maybe like more so like, I guess, against Fergus, but maybe some people can describe this as coming out for Pierre. But I'm not sure like what your interpretation to this is, but basically he's against this decision from Fergus and said that, he said Fergus should resign for this. That's how severe that he thinks this supposed offense was. So yeah, that's kind of the story. So I'll pass the question off to you guys. Do you guys think that what Fergus did was partisan, and do you think that he should resign for it if it was partisan?
I think that it was pretty I think it was pretty clearly in favor of the Liberals. Like I'm sorry. I don't think that this was a neutral decision. I think like if you watch the lead up to that, Trudeau literally calls Pierre spineless like 2 minutes before that. He calls him spineless. I feel like insult wise, spineless is over wacko. Maybe that's just me. Wacko is something that like I feel like a bunch of kids would say, whereas I feel like spineless is pretty savage. Not that it's necessarily enough to kick even Trudeau out, but I think it's really really crazy that he actually ejected Pierre for it, because it's just like I don't think the punishment suited the crime, right? Like I don't think that wacko was so savage. It's not like he like dropped a bunch of F-bombs and like called him a dog turd or something like that. Like he literally just called him wacko. And I don't know why he made such a big deal of it. And then I think when Pierre refused to rescind it, I think he basically was just like, I'm gonna use my power because he can, And I think that shows that this is not a partisan. Like this is not a he's not on both sides, is what I'm trying to get at. Like he's definitely liberal leaning, and I think that is a problem for the role, particularly if he's going to do stuff like eject the leader of the opposition out of parliament, for what is really a very tame, all things considered, statement. And I think that's pretty clear that even from like Tom Malcare's opinion on it, I think he's kind of also aligned with the fact that this is completely this is clearly showing a liberal bias. And I think that the fact that the former NDP leader is calling it out is also kind of leaning more into that this is, again, just like a showing that this guy is not taking the role of being in between the two, as being in between the two, but being more on the one side than the other. And I think that that's a problem for that role. So maybe I don't know if necessarily they can just get rid of him very easily, but I don't think that that's a good look for him at all. Probably not as bad as bringing in a former Nazi and applauding him, but definitely not a good look either.
Yeah, for those audience members who don't know that story, so the Fergus is actually the second speaker that we've had in a very short amount of time, because the original speaker of the House of Commons was forced to resign after he invited a Ukrainian war hero, quote unquote, who fought against the Russians in the Second World War without researching who was on the side of the Russians and who was on the side of the Germans in World War II, right? So like it turns out that that person that they brought in was a war hero. The part hero is very questionable here, who served in the SS, in the Waffen SS of the German, like Ukrainian division, who definitely did fight against the Russians. I'll say that. But yeah, they basically the guy is like super old. I think he was in like a wheelchair or something. He had a cane. They wheeled him in and they like gave him a standing ovation in the House of Commons, which turned out to be a massive embarrassment for Canada as a whole, as the entire country, obviously, right? And this was used in Russian propaganda by Putin to justify the invasion of Ukraine later on, because he was saying how he wanted to denazify Ukraine, and this just added fuel to that fire, right? Like it gave that theory legitimacy, where before you could argue that Putin's just making stuff up. Well, now it's like, the Canadian Parliament literally gave a Nazi a standing ovation. So this is just ridiculous. And then they forced that guy to resign, and then they brought in the new guy, and this new guy doesn't seem like he's that much better, right? And just one more thing before I pass it off to you, Dom. So this isn't the first time that something that there's been issues between Fergus and Pierre Poilievre. So if I remember correctly, there was one time where the speaker, Fergus, wanted to make a speech before question period. So he delayed question period to make his speech. And his speech was just about how, like, the MPs from like a certain group, like I think it was like a conservative like section of the House of Commons, was being disruptive, and it was just, ruining decorum in the House of Commons. And he delayed question period to make that speech, which, like, question period is like, you're not supposed to delay it. Like, you as the Speaker of the House, you're supposed to like do your job and have question period when the time is due. If you delay it, then like that ruins everybody's schedules, and it's like you're trying to delay like a formal process, right? But basically that's what happened. And then that was also another big complaint that the conservatives and conservative supporters had against Fergus. So there's been multiple issues around this speaker. So before I share my opinion, I know, Dom, you've been trying to speak for a long time, so I'll pass it off to you first.
Yeah. So I was doing like a bit of research and whatnot, and I noticed that I think he was like a part of the Liberal Party at one point. So I think whether he means to or not, he would probably subconsciously somehow, some way, be more biased towards the left side rather than the right side. So I don't necessarily think that's the right thing to do, considering the fact that the Speaker of the House of Commons should be a mediator between two different parties and should be as unbiased as possible. So I think in a way he probably unconsciously or subconsciously like said decisions and made decisions just because of like where he used to be, and then maybe he didn't do it on purpose, maybe it just happened, but maybe he did do it on purpose for like a little bit of a deeper like thought or plan. But I think, yeah, maybe at that point you should switch the mediator up to be someone who's a little less unbiased, because from what's going on it seems relatively biased. So yeah, hopefully, I don't know what will happen, maybe he'll change or we'll change the spear of comments, but we'll see.
You know what we also need? Just a change in government as a whole, not just the speaker, but the entire government. But I don't want to go into that rant today because I've already ranted well enough on that front. But yeah, anyways, there's actually one more story that just broke that's somewhat related. It's Canadian politics news right before the show, which is that the NDP current NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, had said that his party will support the budget, the Liberal budget that we've been all hating on for the past 2 weeks. So, woohoo, yeah. There's not going to be an election, and this budget is going to pass. So yeah, enjoy your extra taxes. Anyways, let me pass it to Tristan to see if he has any additional thoughts. And then after that, we'll move on to the next story.
I mean, who's surprised that Jagmeet discount Liberal passed the Liberal budget? Like, I was not expecting him to stand up against the Liberal budget at this point. Like, he's proven to be basically liberal, but in orange, and I think that's already meant that the budget was at this point a foregone issue. It was already going to be going through. So, enjoy your extra taxes, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunate. Anyways, if you guys don't have anything else to add, let's move on to our final story of tonight, which is useless AI assistants. So maybe I'm like imparting a bit of my opinion on this story already with the headline, but I'll let you be the judge of that, right? So what I wanted to talk about was two devices that recently came out in particular. So number one is called the Rabbit R1. As you can see, it's like a little orange Etch-a-Sketch box almost, except it's a lot smaller, obviously. And it's supposed to be an AI assistant. So it has this like little scroll wheel on the side, and then it has a touch screen that you can't really use to scroll through things with, because they force you to use a scroll wheel for whatever reason, even though it is a touch screen, but it doesn't support scrolling. And then there's like also a little swivel camera thing up on the top, and you can like point the camera at a thing and ask it, hey, like, what is this? And then it'll tell you what it is after waiting like 20 seconds. But yeah, basically this device is $200 US, and it recently came out, and a lot of people are like, the proponents of this device are saying that this is the way of the future. You're going to have an AI assistant follow you around and answer questions and do all this stuff, and it's not marketed as a phone replacement, which is weird because that means you still have to carry around your phone, but it's just an extra device that you can that'll help you with your life in multitude of ways using AI stuff. So that's the Rabbit R1. And then there's also this other device called the Humane AI pin. So it's a little pin that goes on your shirt, and then it has a little projector thing that you can project like onto your palm, and it'll read and it has a camera, right? So it can see your hand, and you can use gestures to scroll through things and tell it what to do and stuff like that. Or you can just press your finger on like the AI pin, and it'll detect that it's being pressed, and then you can ask a question or something like that. So because it has a camera, you can also point it at something and ask it what is it and stuff like that, right? So it's another kind of AI assistant device. And this one's a lot more expensive. This one is like $700 apparently, and also you have to buy a subscription to access their AI cloud. So these devices came out and it was reviewed by MKBHD. So if you guys, I'm sure you guys know who MKBHD is, but if somehow our audience members are living under a rock and we don't know who they don't know who the MKBHD channel and the Marques Brownlee is. Marques Brownlee is one of the biggest tech reviewers, or probably the biggest tech reviewer at this point out there, and he reviewed both the AI pin and the Rabbit R1, and let's just say the reviews are not good. So yeah, basically he said that this is just kind of like pretty useless, and the battery dies really quickly, and the AI pin gets really hot when it's like right up against your chest, right? Yeah, basically it's pretty. It seems like it's not working as intended, at least, and also, just to add insult to injury, it turns out that for the Rabbit R1, at least, it's just running Android. Like, it could have been an Android app this whole time. Like, there was no reason whatsoever for it to be a separate device, because somebody managed to crack the software and get it up and running on an Android device. So yeah, this whole time that it could have just been an app. But they decided to make it into its own device for whatever reason. So yeah, basically, and also, by the way, the reason how you can tell that it's like the Humane AI pin or the Rabbit R1, the reason why you can tell it's probably not a very successful product is that I've never seen a single woman use any of these things. I'm not sure if you guys noticed that trend as well. Like, same with the Apple Vision Pro. Like, I've never seen, like, apart from the ads, of course, right? Apart from the commercials, like, or the demonstrations, or maybe certain tech reviewers, I've never seen a woman actually use any of these tech products in real life. Which, like, not to be sexist here, but this is like a trend that I've noticed where, like, women tend to be more conservative in terms of, like, trying new things and stuff like that, right? And men tend to be more enthusiastic with tech. So, like, it's like, if the women are using it, that means that it brings real value because it actually improves people's lives in a real way. And if, like, men are using it, it's just like kind of like a cool new toy that they want to try. So, like, maybe I'm being sexist, but that's just kind of like my opinion. Not sure what you guys think about that, but anyways, that's just what I've noticed. So my question to you on this story is, like, what do you guys think, like, really went wrong with the device? And do you picture a world where this can work if it was improved somehow? Or do you think this whole category is just kind of smoke and mirrors and there's no real value in it?
Absolute smoke and mirrors, no real value to it. First and foremost, like, literally, I have a Google Pixel for context. Like, if I do this right now, just as a live example, okay, like, it just introduces like Gemini. So I switch it over from like Google Assistant to Gemini. So that right there is the first thing. So having it on your pocket and having AI help you throughout the day is completely useless. I can just go, hey, and then I can get help instantaneously right away. And the second one too, literally could be an Android app. Like, well, gee, like, why would I like buy a whole different product for it? And then you said something about a camera, but there's literally Google Lens you can use on your phone too. So, like, why would you ever need to have more products on you? It's like back in the old days when you had an iPod and a phone. Like, it's useless. Just have like your phone and then you call it a day. People want like less things sometimes. And to your like last comment, yeah, I guess I see where you're coming from, but there's always like the anomaly. Like, there's still like a small demographic of people like on the opposite gender who might be into the whole tech thing. But yeah, I do see your point, but I'll stay neutral on that. But um yeah, I think it's a wacko. Let's say that for both. Complete wacko. You guys can keep me out if you want. I'm sure I'm allowed to stay.
That was pretty good. Dom over here being a straight savage right out the gate. Yeah, I mean, I kind of got to agree with him on that front. Like, this is just over-engineered e-waste. I don't know who thought that making, because let's be real, what the little iRabbit thing is another smartphone that you can strap to your chest. Why? I have one in my pocket already. Why do I need your little smartphone basically strapped to my chest? Right? Okay. And then the other one is just a full-on gimmick. The humane one, it's just a gimmick. Like, picture like the printing things. From what I've seen from the technology, it is not ready at all for ease of use. And either way, even if it was ready, even if this was a very functioning what's it called? It's like it feels even more useless than the rabbit, because like I feel like there's so many extra steps you have to go through to get it to the position where you can read it. Like, I gotta shine it on my hand. Now I gotta look at my hand, like there's just like, if I'm looking at my hand already, why didn't I just take out my phone and then look at my hand with the device in it and just, wow, who'd have thought?
Okay, so to be clear, that like the humane pin, it has a speaker, so like it's supposed to audibly answer your questions. So it's not like you're not just interacting it with your hand, but it's just, I can see how maybe if you're out in public and you don't want to like be talking to your AI assistant out in public because you seem kind of like weird doing that, then like maybe you'd opt for the projector like hand thing, right? But like, yeah, it's not the only option, to be clear.
Okay, fair enough. But also, it's $700. It is e-waste. I could just buy a second phone, strap it to my chest, and have that my phone thing, and just have it on text to speech to do the same role. And I'd probably spend less money on it than having that pin. And honestly, it would probably have better battery life and get less hot. So I mean, it just seems like it's just e-waste. And clearly the rabbit one is just straight up e-waste, in the sense of like, it's just an Android phone. There was no reason that this should be its own hardware. The hardware is providing functionally no value to this value proposition. And so I think that with the rabbit, like, just make it an app, or they're just trying to sell us something for the sake of the larger margins than the ones you see on the app side. And again, as Dom kind of was suggesting, like there's no reason to do it when you have a smartphone. So I think these are both just basically e-waste at this point. Like it's just like, it's completely gimmicky. There's no real value coming out of it. And like, I think that the big thing that would be an actual real benefit would be AI for smartwatches. Now, that's something I could see being useful, because smartwatches are kind of useless right now. Like, honestly, I have a smartwatch. I'm not wearing it, as you can see. I have a Fitbit on, but the Fitbit's bad. The Fitbit's pretty dumb. But my smartwatch, it can do basically nothing of value, really. Like, I can change the watch face, I can move things around a little bit. I can have it track when I run, which my Fitbit does better. I can do goofy little stuff like that. But in terms of value proposition, it's not really providing that much, besides maybe letting me know I have a text so I can look at my text. But if you could use the smartphone to talk to the AI, not smartphone, the smartwatch to talk to AI, I feel like that is an area where there's some value. Maybe through an app on the smartwatch, because the smartwatch is a little smart. It's an Android phone. The smartwatch is an Android phone. Like all the Google Watches, they're just Android phones in watch format. It can run Rabbit. Why don't we put Rabbit on Google smartwatches or whatever? So I think that there's just making a bunch of e-waste when there's an amazing market opportunity over there in the watch land, because I don't want to wear a little pin either way, but I will wear a watch, right? So I think that there's a lot more potential value in that side. And then with regards to Andy's perspective on like, if if ladies have the technology, it's like a positive sign with regards to that. I think that like the reason why guys tend to have more stuff is there tends to be a lot more experiences on the newer hardware that is more enjoyable for the for guys by and large, more commonly than for ladies, just because like, you know, more men tend to like, say for example, like with the Vision Pro, more men tend to like video games overall. And so in general, the people who will buy a Vision Pro and want to maybe play games on it or something, they're going to be more men. And the people who are buying a Vision Pro, more often than not, they don't want to just have a paperweight. So if I want to play games and I bought a Vision Pro or whatever, and I'm like, okay, like I can use it as my screen or whatever, all those different features that Apple's got. I can use it for that, or I can use it for some games or whatever too in my spare time, right? Like I'm kind of getting more value out of it. So you can kind of justify the price a lot more than when you only have a sole use case for it, right? And so I think that there's a lot of the new tech that comes out tends to be more there's more use cases for guys because of the video game aspect being such a large market that tends to have more men interested in it than women. I think that is something where we tend to see more men on the upside. And I think that like is something with like technology in general, like with like computers and everything, just overall. I think that a lot of guys got into technology because of video games. Because, like, for example, you want to play the latest games, you had to upgrade your computer. And if you had to upgrade your computer, you had to take it apart and mess around with it, right? Like, there's a lot of steps that go into it in order to play those games that if you're exposed at a younger age, it becomes a lot easier to have that become part of your personality and your lifestyle and things you're interested in, which if you're not exposed to, it's harder to incorporate into your, it's harder to you know, realize maybe you'd be super interested in this, but you know, you've never been exposed to it. So it just doesn't come up. So I think that's kind of more so where there's kind of a difference. It's actually, I think that with your point about if it being really common, if like girls have it, it's probably doing well. I think that's pretty clear, like in terms of usefulness as well, because like the more useful the item is, the more likely more people in general will use it and purchase it. And so I think that's why you'll see like some areas there's a little much higher like girls have been purchasing those devices because there's more value to be gained. And I think interestingly, one area that I've seen a lot more women purchasing the technology is like smartwatches. And I think there's some there's been some software, etc., like features on there that are more female specific that can help like for example, like tracking like periods and cycles and all that stuff, like that there's those features on those devices that provide additional value, whereas a lot of the other ones it's not, there's not as much additional value. So the value add is not quite the same, and so there's no real incentive for people to want to buy the items rather than it just be a gimmick. And I think guys also just tend to be more likely to buy it on a whim than you know, women in general. Again, this is all speaking really generally because like, you know, I'm casting a very wide net, and you know, it's gonna be resonating with some people, and other people it's gonna be completely different for it, right? I'm just generalizing.
I completely understand that, and that was kind of like the point that I was trying to make, right? It's like men, maybe it's like they're more willing to take like chances on like a tech product that might not be entirely clear, but it's like what the use case is, but it's like, kind of cool. And like women, it's like, if I'm going to spend like hundreds of dollars on something, it better have like a clear use case, because like, I don't want to spend time figuring out how to use like a new tech device if it's not even going to like do that much. Right. Whereas like maybe like there's more men in general that find enjoyment in using like a new tech product. I don't know. That's just kind of like what I feel like. But yeah, my point is like, if a product is actually mature and ready, then you're gonna see a more even split between men and women using it, right? So like think of like iPhones and like iPods when that came out, and like if it's something that's like more immature, then you're gonna have way more men using it than women using it. So think of like the Rabbit R1 and like the Apple Vision Pro and stuff like that, right? So that's kind of what I've noticed as an observation, right? So Tristan, you mentioned that you're not like against carrying around a separate device, right? Because you'd be up for having a smartwatch. But is there anything that they can improve upon like the current iteration of the Rabbit R1? Let's say if they made an R2, that they could do to like convince you that this is like useful. So for example, if the battery is garbage right now, what if they somehow made a battery that lasts a week without you having to charge it? What if they somehow, instead of taking 20 seconds to answer a question, it took like 1 second, right? Like everything was somehow everything was local, and it was able to compute all that AI locally and give you an instant response. What if the AI pin doesn't get hot, and what if the battery also lasts for a week? What if, I don't know, like it was just, what if it integrates better with the services that you already use, right? Because one other like kind of maybe vision of the R1 that is like unfulfilled at the moment is that the R1 doesn't integrate well with anything. It's just you can't, as far as I'm aware, you can't even set an alarm or access like a calendar on the R1, which is like a big kind of use case that's missing, because it's like, what do you want an AI assistant for, right? It's to give you like alarms and stuff like that. And it can't even do that. So what if it added that, right? So that's another feature. And what if like, if you go above that, it integrates with like Uber Eats, right? So you can order Uber Eats off of your Rabbit R1 or something like that. So like, say if it's perfectly integrated, like, and everything that's like currently wrong with it is improved, except the form factor is still the same. Like, do you think that then it would be useful, or is it still a hard no from you?
No, it's still a hard no, and I'll tell you why. It's because why would I ever want a pin? So is this one? Sorry, just to clarify, is this one a pin on your chest, or is this one just a little device? Like, do I wear this one, or is that just the humane?
The like both, right? Answer it for both, right? So answer it for the R1 is the device that you carry around, right? The orange little box, and the humane pin is the pin that goes on your chest. Okay. So what if they improve both to like the max vision of what it should be, but the form factor is still the same?
Yeah, no, they're both garbage. Sorry, just to clarify my opinion, because like why am I ever going to want to take the orange thing out rather than a phone? Just off the bat, like, why am I ever going to do that? Because honestly, there's no way that the orange thing in the form factor that it's currently in is going to be better than a modern smartphone, because of the fact that it is a modern, well, it's at best it can be a modern smartphone. It's probably honestly right now a budget smartphone currently at best. But in the future, say in your theoretical where they've upgraded it like crazy, it would at best be a modern smartphone, which means that it is at best as fast as my phone, which means that I might as well just use my phone. And so the pin one, honestly, I just kind of feel like the pin is it's kind of ugly. So I feel like from a visual standpoint, I don't really want it strapped to my chest anyway. And then if it's not strapped to my chest, where's it going to be where it's going to be providing me value? I don't like. There's not really an apparent spot that is an alternative, except for maybe on the wrist. But if they slap it on the wrist, it's a completely different device. You've changed the form factor at that point because that's now a watch. So at this point, I don't think there's anything that they can do with their current either pin on chest or little device I have to pull out of my pocket that is going to be providing me sufficient value to ever justify the price range. Because at that price range, as I said, if I want it strapped to my chest, I could buy a budget phone and probably have a better experience strapping that to my chest, or I could just take out my current phone and save $700 US. And like, again, it's just like the value add, like, it's just not there. And I think really what it comes down to it is, I think the only way that any of these sorts of device has a chance is if it is in the watch range, something that is, with watches, they're unisex, both men and women wear watches, and the watch already has a primary purpose. There's already a standard for having watches. You want to check the time, you look at your wrist, right? And if it can also do this AI stuff, I feel like there's a lot of potential value add on that front. Everything else, I'm just like, a pin, a pocket thing, whatever. It just seems like it's more effort than it's worth. It's taking me more, like, it's supposed to make my life easier, but it's just making it more complicated for no additional gain. And also, if it just doesn't work very well, then I still have to take my phone out of my pocket to fix what it's done. So it's even worse.
So obviously some strong opinions there. Dom, what do you think? Like, same question to you. Is there something that they can do to, like, if they maxed out every feature, but the form factor stays the same, is it going to be better for you? Is still a hard no?
To be honest, no, I wouldn't give up, but because I have this right over here, like, why do I need to complicate my life? Like, I find myself more of a minimalist in terms of like technology. If I can have any opportunity to have a place where everything is in one specific place, I'll definitely like favor that for sure. I don't want to overcomplicate things and then add more technology than like what I already have. I think it's just a waste of my time. And then to add to like that little clip thing, like right over here, I agree. It's not like the best look in the world, and I could see it like overheating, and then I think like having radiation on your body isn't really good for you, and then it could be cancerous. So having it like kind of close to over here, I don't know if that'll be any like bad to like your body and like cancerous or whatnot. And well, was that like your questions? Was that pretty much it, or was there more to it? Or
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, like, is there any way this could work, right? So, like,
okay, got it.
not like, you know, sponsored by the like makers of the R1 or anything like that. I'm just like trying to keep an open mind, right? You guys know me, like, I know by sharing this story, it makes us, the whole Zillennial Crew, sound maybe like tech Luddites. We're just old boomers, old Zillennials who don't understand technology, and like, this is like, the AI is the new thing and these assistants are going to take over. Like, I'm just sitting here saying, like, I'm sorry guys, I'm trying to keep an open mind, but I just don't get it, right? Like, I just don't see how these devices are useful. I'm just wondering, like, is that like to the extreme of trying to keep an open mind? Is there any way this could work in its current form or not? And this is my question to you guys.
Okay, well, like if there were to be like, patch 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and so on and so forth, like the first thing that comes into my mind, like, just because biasly Fallout is like on Amazon Prime, and then like I saw the first episode, I gotta watch more of it. It seems like decently good. I'll watch more of that so far or eventually, but you know how like in Fallout they have like the Pit Boy, and it's kind of like a one for all place to have everything in terms of like AI technology. If at any point life gets to that point where everything goes onto your wrist, like I would be like opposed to that. Like I think they would be quite cool. Like in said future, maybe we get rid of these guys over here and have it just like you wear like a wristband every single morning, and then you like go your settings, your weapons. Not the weapons, but yeah, like if everything was just here, like one for all for one, I think that would work. But otherwise, this isn't really convincing me, like this whole R1 business. So I'm just gonna stick to my phone for now and call it a day. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you guys said. I think you guys said all what I was gonna say already. And it's like, I always try to keep an open mind, especially when it comes to new technology, right? I'm trying to explore like where the pros and cons are, and like if there are a lot of cons, how do we fix them? And like I thought about this over and over again, and I just don't see how this could work. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't see it, right? Like if you're a developer of one of the devices, either the Humane Pin or the Rabbit R1, or if you're like, one of the people who run the company, like it's just I'm sorry, right? Like I don't know how you could make it better. And I don't know how you could, like, even if you made it like, instant response and everything, it's just I get it could be an app, right? Just make an app. Like how hard is that? But yeah, anyways, that's all I have to say about this story. I think again, you guys said all what I was gonna say. So yeah, assuming that you guys don't have anything to add, we've gone on for a long time. Why don't we end the episode right now? Great. Let me pass it to Dom then for the outro.
Okay, sounds good. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. And just a little context for you guys, I won't be in the next one. If it may or may not be with just Andy or Tristan, that's to be decided, I suppose. But other than that, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the main channel over here, Zillennial Money Podcast, and the Clips channel Sue as well. And be sure to subscribe and comment and like on all of our content for individual channels too as well. And with that being said, bye guys, peace.
Yeah, we'll hold down the fort for you next week, Dom. So see you guys next week. Or see Tristan next week, not Dom.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for watching. See you next time, gents.